Returning from another mission, I noticed that Elena was behaving unusually. She was often thoughtful and left home for unknown reasons. I began to notice that her phone was often face down, and she avoided my questions about where she was. One evening, when the children were already asleep, I decided to talk to her. "You're hiding something from me," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. "Your behavior is strange." Elena looked away, not knowing how to respond. "Just a lot to do at work," she finally answered. But her eyes spoke of something else. "Job? Or something else?" I asked, trying to catch in her face at least some confirmation of my suspicions. She didn't answer, and a tense silence reigned in the room. I realized that I would find the answer to my questions myself. The next morning, before Elena left for work, I noticed that she had left her phone on the kitchen table. This was an opportunity I couldn't miss. My heart was pounding in my chest as I took her phone and started scrolling through messages and calls. Among the usual correspondence with friends and colleagues, I came across messages from a person I didn't know. The texts were short, but frank enough to understand the essence of what was happening. My hands shook as I read each word. At that moment when I wanted to ask her about this, Elena entered the kitchen and saw me with her phone in my hands. Her face instantly turned pale. "What are you doing with my phone?" Her voice trembled with anger and fear. "Explain this to me," I said, showing her the messages. "Who is this?" Elena fell silent, not knowing what to say. The silence stretched on forever until she finally exhaled. "It's just a friend. Nothing serious." "Friend? Do you think I'm that stupid?" My voice became louder. "How could you?" She didn't answer. I felt my world crumble. I left the house, trying to collect my thoughts. Everything I knew, everything I believed, turned out to be a lie. Now there was only one thing left to do: find the truth and decide how to live further. I went outside, and the cold morning air cooled my thoughts a little. Thousands of questions were spinning in my head, but the main thing was, why did she do it? What did I miss? As I wandered the streets, I realized that I needed time and space to think about the situation. I went to the nearest park, sat on a bench, and took out my phone. I decided to call my old friend Alexei, who has always been like a brother to me. "Hey brother," I said when he answered. "I need to talk. You are free?" "Of course, I'm always free for you." "What's happened?" I told him everything, without missing a single detail. Alexei listened in silence without interrupting, and when I finished, he sighed. "This is serious," he said. "But before we draw conclusions, we need to understand everything. You must talk to her honestly and openly. There may be something you don't know about." "You're right," I agreed. "But I don't know how to do it. I'm afraid to hear the truth. Sometimes the truth is painful, but it is necessary. Come to me, we will talk and think about what to do next." I thanked him and went to Alexei. Along the way, I tried to gather all my strength and determination. A difficult conversation with Elena lay ahead of me, and I had to be prepared for any outcome. When I returned home, Elena was in the living room, sitting on the sofa with a book in her hands. She looked at me with concern when I entered. "We need to talk," I said, sitting down opposite her, and this time without evasions and lies. Her face turned pale, but she nodded. I started by finding her messages and how it shocked me. She listened silently, head down. "I can't believe you betrayed me," I finished. "Why?" I don't know what to say," she whispered, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "It started out as a friendship, and then I got confused." "Confused?" My voice was full of pain. "You knew what you were doing. You knew it would destroy us." "Forgive me," she said, sobbing. "I was stupid. I made a mistake." Silence filled the room as I tried to process what I had heard. I didn't know what to do next. The only thing I understood is that our lives will never be the same. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, getting up from the sofa. "I need time to think about everything." I left the house, leaving Elena in tears. I went to Alexei, hoping to find support and answers to my questions from him. A long and difficult road lay ahead of me. I came to Alexei, and he greeted me with sympathy and understanding. We sat down in the kitchen and I told him about my plans. I installed a camera in our bedroom, I said. I need to know what happens when I'm not there. Alexei frowned, but didn't say anything against it. He knew that the situation was difficult and required decisive action. I took out my phone and turned on the live feed from the camera. On the screen, we saw Elena nervously walking around the room. She was talking on the phone and her words were clearly audible. "You have to help me," she said. "I do not know what to do. He found out everything. If he catches us, it will be bad." My heart sank with pain and anger. Alexei looked attentively at the screen. His face was stern. "Who is she talking to?" he asked. "With my lover," I answered, clenching my fists. "I have to stop this." "Wait," Alexei said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Do not rush. Let us think. We have to do this right." We watched the broadcast and I felt my resolve strengthen. Elena continued to beg her lover for help, and every breath she took hurt me deeper. "I'll come as soon as possible," replied the man on the other end of the line. "Hold on. Everything will be fine." I turned off the broadcast and looked at Alexei. "I need to do something," I said, feeling anger filling me. "I can't just sit and watch this." "I understand," Alexei answered. "But first, let's discuss the plan. You must be smart. If we go with emotions, things can go wrong." We began to discuss possible steps to expose Elena and her lover. Alexei suggested collecting more evidence and contacting a lawyer. I agreed that this was a reasonable plan, but I found it difficult to wait. We agreed to meet the next day to continue the discussion and develop a detailed plan. I returned home feeling a little better, knowing that I had a friend who would help me through this ordeal. I lay awake that night thinking about how my life had changed. I knew that many difficulties awaited me ahead, but I was ready to fight for my future, no matter what. That night I couldn't resist. I decided that I could no longer wait and endure this humiliation. I returned home seething with anger and determination. Opening the door, I immediately felt that Elena was home. She met me in the corridor, surprised and scared. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to hide the panic in her voice. I silently walked past her into the living room and began to tear and throw everything in my path. At first it was books from the shelves, then vases and photographs. I couldn't stop. All the pain and anger poured out. Elena screamed, begged to stop, but her words were like sound in a vacuum. I didn't hear her anymore. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. I opened it, and her lover stood in front of me. "What's going on here?" he shouted, seeing the chaos in the house and the frightened Elena. Without thinking, I pounced on him. We grappled and a fierce fight began. I put all my pain and disappointment into every blow. Elena screamed, trying to separate us, but it was too late. At some point I felt his blows getting weaker. He lost his balance and fell to the floor, losing consciousness. I stood over him, breathing heavily, realizing what I had done. Elena ran up to him, screaming and crying. "You killed him!" she shouted. I stepped back, realizing the seriousness of what had happened. Silence reigned in the house, broken only by Elena's sobs. "This is the end," I said quietly, realizing that my life would never be the same. I left the house, not knowing what to do next. There was a cold wind outside, but I didn't feel anything. Only Elena's words and images of a destroyed house sounded in my head. I knew there was inevitable punishment ahead, but I was willing to accept it to end this nightmare. After I left home, I needed to collect my thoughts. I returned to the base and decided to turn on the security camera to see what was happening in the house before my arrival. I knew it would hurt, but I needed to know the truth to the end. On the monitor screen, I saw Elena and her lover enter the house. They were together, laughing and hugging. My heart sank in pain, but I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Then they went up to the bedroom. The camera recorded their intimacy. Every gesture, every movement. It was unbearable, but the worst thing was that I heard her words. Elena whispered to her lover that he was better in everything than her husband. She said she had never felt so alive and wanted. You know, he was never as passionate as you, I heard her voice. I have never been as happy as I am with you. You are the best thing that happened to me. These words pierced me like a knife. I sat in front of the monitor, feeling a wave of anger and disappointment wash over me. All my efforts, all my love and care turned out to be unnecessary. She betrayed me, and these words were confirmation of her betrayal. I turned off the monitor and sat down, lost in my thoughts. The pain was unbearable, but I knew I had to act. Elena crossed the line, and I couldn't just leave it like that. I knew that my revenge had to be thorough and cold. I was ready to go to the end so that she would understand that betrayal is not forgiven. That night, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. The next morning, I collected my thoughts and decided that I needed to discuss everything with Elena. I couldn't just leave without telling her everything that had accumulated in my soul. When I entered the house, Elena was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to read a magazine. She looked up and met my gaze. Her eyes reflected fear and uncertainty. "We need to talk," I said, trying to control myself. "About what?" Elena tried to remain calm, but her voice was shaking. "About us. About what happened." I sat down opposite her. "I know everything. I saw the recording." Her face turned pale. She realized that there was no longer any point in denying the obvious. "I didn't want you to find out like that," she began. "It just happened. I was lonely. You were constantly at the base." "That's not an excuse," I interrupted her. "You betrayed me. You destroyed everything we built together." She lowered her head, not knowing what to say. "You told him he was better than me in everything. That you have never been as happy as you are with him. This is true?" I asked, hoping to hear at least some explanation. Elena was silent. Then, gathering her courage, she said, "Yes, it's true. I was unhappy with you." These words were the last straw. I stood up, not wanting to hear her excuses anymore. "I'm leaving," I said. "I can't be with you anymore. Live with it, Elena. Live with the knowledge that you ruined our lives." I turned and left the house, feeling the door not only to our home but also to our life together, closing behind me. Scene 6. Looking for a new beginning. I packed my things and decided to start a new life. I didn't know where this path would lead me, but I was sure of one thing. I would never return to Elena. Betrayal left a deep mark that cannot be healed. Goodbye, Elena. I hope your new best can give you what I couldn't. I returned home late in the evening, having collected all my thoughts and decided to act. Elena sat in the living room as if nothing had happened. I took a deep breath and entered the room, feeling the tension build. "We need to talk," I said, and her gaze immediately became wary. "What do you want to say?" she asked, trying to look calm. "You need to leave," I said. "You can't live here anymore." Elena stood up, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. "What? You can't just kick me out," she tried to argue, but her voice was shaking. "I can and will do it," I answered coldly. "You betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage. There's no room for you anymore." She realized that it was useless to argue. I saw emotions change on her face, from anger to despair. "Where should I go?" she asked, holding back tears. "It's not my concern," I replied. "But if I see you or your lover near our house again, I am not responsible for my actions." You understood me? Elena nodded, her face pale. "Are you serious?" she asked in a whisper. "Absolutely," I replied. "You have an hour to pack your things and leave." She didn't argue anymore. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she began to pack her things. I watched her leave our house, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. When the door closed behind her, I felt empty, but I knew I had taken the right step. Betrayal cannot be forgiven, and now I had to start a new life without her and her betrayals. After Elena left, the house seemed unusually quiet and empty to me. I didn't know how to fill this void. Thoughts were swarming in my head, emotions were seething, and I couldn't find a place for myself. At some point, feeling that I was simply going crazy, I decided to drown out my pain in the simplest and most accessible way. I took the phone and found the number of the escort agency. It wasn't something I usually did, but I felt like I needed something to take my mind off this nightmare. "Hello? I need a few girls for the evening," I said into the phone, trying not to show my confusion. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I opened it, and standing on the threshold were two girls dressed in chic evening dresses. They smiled at me, and I motioned for them to come in. "Hello, we are Maria and Anna," they introduced themselves, their voices sounding casual, as if they had done this 1,000 times already. "Come in," I answered, feeling my voice tremble treacherously. We sat down in the living room, and I poured us all some wine. The girls tried to make casual conversation, but I could barely listen to them. Everything seemed somehow unreal. I tried to smile, but it was difficult. The main thing is that I was able to kick my wife out and not become a heel and forgive her for cheating.